All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack one of the most important and honestly one of the most surprising cases in the history of Indian family law. It's a story with a legal twist that, believe it or not, has been shaping the law for almost 50 years. So let me ask you a question. Can you imagine going to court, proving beyond a doubt that your spouse was cruel to you, so much so that the highest court in the country agrees with you, and then you still lose the case? I mean, how on earth is that even possible? Well, it is possible. In 1975, the Indian Supreme Court looked one man in the eye and essentially said yes, that's exactly what's happening. This is the story of Dastane versus Dastane, a legal fight that completely changed how we think about marriage, cruelty, and even what it means to forgive someone in the eyes of the law. To really get our heads around this, we have to do something a little unusual. We're going to start at the end with the final verdict, because that's where the whole mystery of this case is hiding. And here it is, the final word from the Supreme Court. On the one hand, they say, the wife was guilty of cruelty. Check. But on the other hand, the husband's appeal was dismissed. He literally won the argument, but lost the case. This is the paradox we're going to solve today. So who were the people at the center of this legal tornado? It's time to meet the Dastanes. You know, what's really striking here is that this was not your typical couple from the 1950s. I mean, look at this. Dr. Dastane had a PhD from Australia, Mrs. Dastane had a master's degree and a job in a government ministry. These were two highly educated, modern professionals, which just makes the details of their conflict all the more complicated. So let's run through the timeline real quick. They get married in '56, they have two daughters pretty quickly, but by February 1961, just 5 years into the marriage, they're living apart. And only a year later, Dr. Dastane is filing for separation. So the big question is, what went so wrong in those 5 short years? Well, a really important clue actually came up before they were even married. In letters between the families, Mrs. Dastane's father mentioned she'd had some mental health challenges, blaming it on things like sunstroke and malaria. Dr. Dastane later argued that this was downplaying a much more serious condition, and this issue just kind of simmered right below the surface of their whole relationship. So, for Dr. Dastane to win his case, he had to prove that his wife's actions were, legally speaking, cruel. And the things he described were so intense, they actually forced the court to rethink what cruelty even means in a marriage. And the court found that yes, these things actually happened. She tore her own Mangalsutra, the sacred symbol of their marriage. She would lock him out of his own house. She threatened to burn the place down, threatened his job. The court looked at all this and saw a clear, undeniable pattern of severe psychological abuse. And that led them to this moment, the court's official finding. The words are right there, plain as day. Her conduct legally amounted to cruelty. So, round 1 goes to Dr. Dastane. He had proven his case. He was a victim of cruelty.
Now, this right here is the first huge legacy of this case. Before Dastane, the courts in India often used an old English standard for cruelty. You basically had to prove there was a physical danger, a threat to your life, limb, or health. But this case changed all that. It set a new standard, saying cruelty is anything that makes you reasonably afraid of any harm, and that absolutely includes mental and emotional harm. This was a total game changer.
Okay, so if the court agreed there was cruelty, why did he lose? How did he lose? The answer is hiding in one single legal idea, one that deals with forgiveness, the law, and, well, the most private parts of a marriage. And the word is condonation. You've got to understand this term. In the eyes of the law, it's not just about saying, I forgive you. It's a two-step thing. You have to forgive the act, and you have to fully bring your spouse back into their original place in the marriage. It's like a full, complete reconciliation. So the million-dollar question for the court was this. Was there any hard evidence that Dr. Dastane had actually condoned his wife's cruelty, which would legally just wipe the slate clean? And the evidence? It was their third child. Remember that timeline? When they last lived together in February 1961, Mrs. Dastane was already pregnant? The court's logic was incredibly direct. This quote from the judgment lays it all out. They argued that having a normal sexual life, especially one that results in a child, isn't just a physical act. It implies a full restoration of the marriage. So by continuing that intimate relationship, the court said Dr. Dastane had legally forgiven or condoned all the cruelty that had happened before. Now, this forgiveness isn't permanent. You can think of condemnation as a conditional reset button. If the bad behavior flares up again, those old offenses can be revived and used in court. But in this case, the court decided that Mrs. Dastane's later actions, like writing to his boss for money after he left her, weren't cruelty. They were just what a person would do when they've been abandoned. So that reset button, it was never unpressed. So even though the Dastane's personal story ended in this strange legal limbo, the case itself created this incredibly powerful legal framework, what we now call the Dastane Doctrine, and it truly changed everything. So here's the Dastane Revolution in a single chart. First, the meaning of cruelty was blown wide open to include mental harm. Second, the standard of proof was lowered, making it easier to argue your case. And third, the rules around forgiveness, condonation, were clearly spelled out for the very first time. These three ideas became the new pillars of marriage law in India.
And those pillars have been incredibly strong. For almost half a century now, pretty much any case that deals with cruelty in a marriage has to look back at the rules set down in Dastane. It is without a doubt one of the most important judgments ever delivered.
So in the end, the Dastane case is so much more than just one family's sad story. It forced the entire legal system to look inside the closed doors of a marriage and ask some really tough, really human questions that we still wrestle with today. When does emotional pain become an actual legal injury? And when does forgiveness, in the cold, hard eyes of the law, erase that injury for good?